My name is Claire. I am 33 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Boston called Beacon Hill. It is a beautiful place. The streets are narrow. Old brick houses stand close together. In the mornings, people walk slowly with coffee cups in their hands, and in the evenings, the windows glow with warm yellow light. From the outside, my life looked just as peaceful as the street where I lived. I had a husband. I had a home. I had a steady routine. I had everything that should have made me feel safe. And for a while, I tried very hard to believe that safety was enough. My husband's name was Nathan. Nathan was kind in the quiet way that makes people trust a man immediately. He never raised his voice. He remembered small details. He brought me flowers on random days for no reason. He cooked dinner when I came home tired. He asked gentle questions. He looked at me with patient eyes, as if I were something precious. If someone had asked me to describe him, I would have said the same thing every time. Good, reliable, calm. The kind of man any woman would be lucky to marry. That was the problem. Nathan was never the problem. I was. Or at least, that is what I told myself for almost a year. The truth was more complicated than that. It started on a Thursday evening that felt like every other evening. I stood outside our apartment door with my keys in my hand. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere downstairs, I could hear the faint sound of a television playing through a wall. I remember pausing for a moment before unlocking the door. I did not know why I hesitated. I only knew that my chest felt tight. Then I went inside. The warm smell of garlic, butter, and roasted herbs filled the apartment. Nathan was in the kitchen again, standing at the stove with a wooden spoon in his hand. When he saw me, his face brightened immediately. "Claire, you're home," he said. His voice was soft, almost cheerful. I smiled automatically, the way I always did, and put my bag down near the door. "I tried a new recipe," he said. "I hope you like it." I nodded. "It smells good," I said, and it did. It looked like the kind of scene people imagine when they think about marriage. Warm lights, a loving husband, a quiet evening, safety, but as I stood there watching him, that familiar heavy feeling settled in my chest again, because earlier that day, I had seen someone. His name was Julian. Years ago, before Nathan, Julian had been the center of my world. He was not safe. He was not calm. He was intense and restless and impossible to predict. He used to talk about leaving the city, starting over somewhere new, building a life that felt larger than the one we had. When he looked at me, I felt like the whole world had changed shape. And then one day, he disappeared from my life without warning. No fight, no explanation that made sense, just distance, silence, and then nothing. For years, I told myself I had survived that. For years, I told myself I was wiser now, more mature, more realistic. Then, that afternoon, I saw him on a crowded street outside a bookstore, and something in me moved in a way I had not felt in years. We only spoke for a few minutes. We said ordinary things. "How have you been?" "Do you still live here? You look different." But under those words, I felt something unfinished moving between us like a current under dark water. When I came home that night, I realized I could no longer pretend my marriage was honest. I sat at the table while Nathan served dinner onto my plate. He looked peaceful as he moved around the kitchen, like loving me cost him nothing. We started eating. For a while, all I could hear was the soft sound of forks touching ceramic. Then Nathan looked at me and asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I said too quickly. "Just tired." He studied my face for a second longer than usual. "Long day?" he asked. "Yes," I said again, but the truth was sitting between us already, growing heavier by the second. Finally, I put my fork down. "There's something we need to talk about," I said. Nathan stopped eating. He did not look angry or afraid. He just listened. "I saw someone today," I told him. "Someone from work?" he asked. "No." "Who?" "Julian." His name seemed to change the air in the room. Nathan leaned back slightly in his chair. There was a long silence. Then he asked, "What does that mean?" I looked down at my hands. "I have been trying," I said softly, "for months, to feel something I should feel." He understood before I said the next word. "Love?" he asked quietly. I closed my eyes for a moment. Yes. His face did not change much. That made it worse. "I thought if I loved you enough," he said after a long silence, "one day you would love me the same way." My throat tightened. "I know," I whispered. We sat there in the warm light of our kitchen, two people who had built a home. Around a truth neither of us wanted to face. That night, I packed a suitcase. The next morning, I left. If the story had ended there, maybe it would have been only sad. But it did not end there. It became stranger, darker, harder to explain. At first, everything seemed calm. Nathan did not argue. He did not shout. He did not beg. He told me he still cared about me, and I believed him. I rented a small apartment on the other side of the city, above a florist shop. It was simple and quiet. I told myself I needed space, time, honesty, but during the first week in that apartment, small things began to happen. My phone rang from unknown numbers and went silent the moment I answered. Once, I came home and found my kitchen window unlocked, even though I was sure I had locked it before leaving. One evening, I noticed a white envelope pushed under my door. There was no name on it, no stamp, no explanation. Inside was a single photograph of me walking down Charles Street that morning, carrying coffee in my left hand and looking over my shoulder as if someone had called my name. I stared at the picture for so long that my hands started shaking. There was nothing written on the back, no message, nothing. My first thought was Julian. He had reappeared suddenly. He had always been drawn to intensity, to unfinished things. Maybe he wanted to unsettle me. Maybe he wanted to remind me that he still had power over me. But when I saw him 2 days later at a small cafe near the river, his reaction to the photograph seemed real. He looked genuinely confused. "You think I sent this?" he asked. "I don't know what to think," I replied. He asked to see it. I slid the photograph across the table. He turned it over in his hand, frowning. "This wasn't me, Claire. Then who was it?" He looked at me for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. "But you should be careful." The way he said those words chilled me. Careful of who? He looked out the window instead of answering. That was the first moment I understood that the fear growing inside me was not only about the past, it was about the present too. That same night, I returned home later than usual. The hallway outside my apartment was dark, except for a weak light near the stairs. As I approached my door, I saw something on the floor. Another envelope. My heart started pounding. I picked it up and went inside quickly, locking the door behind me. Inside was another photograph. This one showed me sitting with Julian at the cafe that afternoon. We were leaning slightly toward each other, mid-conversation, frozen in a moment that looked more intimate than it was. My chest turned cold. Someone had been watching me. Not once. Repeatedly. I called the police. An officer came, looked at the photographs, and asked me the obvious questions. "Do you know anyone who might be following you? Anyone angry with you? Anyone from your past?" I told him about Julian. I told him about my recent separation. He listened, wrote notes, and told me they would keep the photographs. But his face told me what his words did not. Without proof, there was little they could do. I barely slept that night. Around 3 a.m, I woke to a faint sound in the apartment. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small sound. A step. I held my breath and listened. Then I heard it again, very softly, coming from the living room. Every part of my body went cold. I reached for my phone and called the police with shaking fingers. I did not move from the bed until they arrived. They searched the apartment. No one was there. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing was broken. But one of the officers noticed that the chain on my front door had been tampered with. It looked old, he said, like maybe it slipped. But I knew it had not slipped. Someone had been there. After that, I stayed with my friend Lena for a few days. Lena was practical, direct, and impossible to scare easily. She worked nights as a nurse and had seen enough pain to stop being dramatic about shadows. But when I showed her the photographs, even she went silent. "You need to think carefully," she said. "Who knows your routines? Who knows where you go? Who knew about Julian?" "Nathan," I said before I could stop myself. She looked at me. "Do you really think he would do this?" I wanted to say no immediately. I wanted to protect the image of him I still carried in my mind, but something deep inside me had already begun to shift. Nathan had always known where I was. He noticed details other people ignored. He remembered times, names, places. He looked calm, but sometimes that calm had felt almost too complete, as if nothing inside him ever slipped out unless he wanted it to. I hated myself for thinking it, but once the thought appeared, it would not go away. The next day, I went back to my apartment in daylight. Lena came with me. We searched every room carefully. In the bedroom, under the edge of a low bookshelf, Lena found something small and black, taped to the wood. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. A tracking device. My stomach twisted. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I could not breathe. There was only one person who had access to my apartment before I left. One person who knew exactly how to move through my life without drawing attention. My hands were trembling when I called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. "Claire," he said softly, as if nothing in the world was wrong. "I found something in my apartment," I said. There was a long silence. Then he asked, "What did you find?" "A tracking device." Another silence, this time deeper. He did not deny it. Instead, he said in that same calm voice, "I was trying to protect you." "From who, Nathan?" He exhaled slowly. "From him, Julian." My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. "You had no right," I whispered. "I just wanted to know you were safe," he said. And suddenly something inside me broke open. Safe. The word sounded ugly now. Sharp. I asked the one question I was afraid of most. "Did you send the photographs?" He was quiet for so long that I already knew the answer before he spoke. "I needed you to understand what kind of man he is," he said quietly. Rage moved through me for the first time. "You were watching me," I said. "You were inside my apartment. You were following me. I never wanted to scare you, Claire, but you did." I hung up on him. That should have ended it, but it did not. The truth made everything worse, before it made anything better. I went to the police with the device and told them everything. This time, they listened differently. They asked about Nathan's access to my apartment. They took my statement again. I expected to feel relief after telling the truth, but instead, I felt exposed, as if every wall around my life had fallen away at once. I blocked Nathan's number. I changed my locks. I stopped walking home alone, and still, fear stayed with me. A week passed, then another. No more envelopes, no more calls, no more photographs. Slowly, my body began to believe the danger had passed. Then, one rainy evening, Julian came to see me. I almost did not open the door. When I did, he looked different than before. Tired, serious. He stood in the dim hallway with rain on his coat and said, "We need to talk." I almost laughed at the irony of that sentence. We had both used it at the worst possible moments in my life. I let him in. He looked around the apartment. noticing the changed locks, the drawn curtains, the way I kept glancing toward the window. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what? For showing up again when your life was already breaking." I folded my arms. "Then tell me why you came." He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "Because he came to see me." Every muscle in my body went still. "Nathan." Julian nodded. "He found me outside my office yesterday. He wanted to warn me to stay away from you." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What did he say exactly?" "He said you were fragile, that you were confused, that I was dangerous for you." I stared at him. Julian's mouth tightened. Then he said something else. He said if I really cared about you, I would disappear again. I sat down slowly. My hands were cold. I asked, "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I need you to understand something," Julian said. "I made a lot of mistakes with you. I hurt you. I was selfish and careless, and I know that. But this isn't about me coming back for some old story. This is about the fact that your husband isn't letting you go." His words should have frightened me more than they did. But in a terrible way, they felt like confirmation of what I already knew. That night, after Julian left, I could not sleep. I sat by the window until dawn and watched the streetlights fade. I thought about love, about the different shapes it can take, the reckless kind that burns brightly and leaves destruction behind, the steady kind that can feel like shelter until it starts locking the doors from the inside. I thought about how I had mistaken calm for safety and guilt for duty. And I realized something difficult. The scariest thing was not that Nathan had changed. The scariest thing was that maybe he had always been this person under the surface, and I had simply refused to look closely enough. 2 days later, the police called. Nathan had admitted to placing the tracking device. He had not admitted to entering the apartment more than once, but they believed he had. A restraining order was approved. The officer on the phone said the words carefully, calmly, professionally. But all I could hear was one thought. It had all been real. My fear had not been. Imagined. My instincts had not betrayed me. For days after that, I moved through the city like a person recovering from a fever. Everything looked ordinary. People laughed in cafes. Trains rattled past. Rain fell. Street musicians played in the square. And yet, the world felt changed. I felt changed. I started going to therapy. At first, I hated it. I hated saying things out loud. I hated hearing how many times I had dismissed my own instincts. But week by week, the truth became easier to hold. My therapist asked me a question that stayed with me. "When did you first feel unsafe with him?" At first, I said never. Then, memories began returning one by one. The way Nathan always knew who I had spoken to. The way he once appeared outside a restaurant when I had casually mentioned maybe meeting an old coworker. The way he smiled whenever I changed plans and stayed home instead. The way his kindness sometimes felt less like generosity and more like quiet management. He had never shouted, never broken a plate, never frightened me in the obvious ways people warn you about. He had just slowly made my world smaller until he stood at the center of it. The realization made me sick. It also made me free. Months passed. The case moved forward. My divorce became more complicated, then strangely simple. Nathan did not fight for money. He did not fight for the apartment. He did not contact me again. Sometimes I wondered if that was mercy or calculation. Maybe he had finally understood that he had been seen. Maybe he knew the quiet version of himself would never protect him now. During that time, Julian stayed away unless I reached out first. That mattered more than I expected. He did not push. He did not ask for anything. Sometimes he sent a short message asking if I was all right. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. He accepted both. One cold afternoon in October, I met him for coffee again. This time there was no electricity, no dangerous sense of the past opening its mouth. There was only honesty. He told me he had changed cities too often and relationships too carelessly. I told him I had spent a year trying to become the kind of woman who could survive without betraying herself. We both laughed once at something small. It was gentle, real. When we left the cafe, he asked, "Are you afraid of starting over?" I looked at the gray river moving behind him and thought for a moment. "Yes," I said, "but I'm more afraid of staying in the wrong life." He nodded, like he understood exactly. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the rooftops. The florist shop below my apartment decorated its windows with white lights. I began to sleep through the night again. I started taking long walks with no destination. I learned how to be alone, without feeling abandoned. That was the strangest part. For years, I thought loneliness was the worst thing that could happen to a woman. Now I knew better. The worst thing was silence inside yourself. The worst thing was knowing the truth and refusing to speak it. By spring, the city felt softer. One evening, I came home after work and found no envelopes, no messages, no shadows waiting near my door. There was only the quiet hallway and my own key in my hand. I stood there for a moment before unlocking the door, remembering that first night, months earlier, when I had paused outside another apartment, another life, another version of myself. This time when I stepped inside, I felt only peace. Real peace, not the kind built on fear, the kind that comes when nothing inside you is hidden anymore. I opened the window and let the cool air into the room. Far below, someone laughed on the sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, a train moved slowly through the city. My life did not look perfect. It did not look simple, but it was mine, and that mattered more than anything. If this story kept you listening, subscribe to my channel for more emotional stories.